This is House Planning Help, episode 77. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're looking to build a new home or to renovate an existing property. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century. My personal goal alongside this is to create an energy efficient home before I turn 40 in August 2016. Coming up in this session, Jackson Moulding from Ecomotive. We're going to be looking at Ashley Vale Group self-builds. So I hope you're well, and if you're underway with your build or whatever stage, what we always want to do with this podcast is to add something to your journey, to your thinking along the way. Possibly you've got to the end of all this and there's something that you want to share, so do get in touch. We enjoy that as well. Perhaps we can sort something out. I always think the best way is via Twitter, just because it's very quick and interactive. We can have a chat on there. Other people can join in as well. So I am at Ben Adam Smith if you want to do that, either to tell me about your projects or just whatever you want. Just before we launch into our podcast interview for today, I wanted to tell you about what I've been up to this week because I organised a surprise for my wife. Yeah, aren't I good? Well, yeah, there was a hidden agenda. This is terrible, isn't it? I shouldn't be explaining this, but I thought, well, we've obviously got a house build coming up that we want to do, and my wife hasn't ever stayed in a passive house, so let's go to the passive house B&B. So I did build this as a surprise, and I was slightly concerned at one point that she might think, oh, I'm going to this luxury spa and then be disappointed when we got there, but luckily she wasn't. She absolutely loved it, found it fantastic, and it is a very nice part of the world. If you're UK based and you haven't done this, it's down in Totnes in the West Country, and I thoroughly recommend it. A big thank you to Erica for looking after us. It's normally Erica and Adam, but Adam, who is author of the Passive House Handbook along with Janet Cottrell, he was away on business, and I think actually either revising the Passive House Handbook or doing a second edition. I can't quite remember which one it is. So that was what he was up to. Busy. So what we'll do is we'll put a link in the show notes in case you want to head along to that. There was also a video that we made about that because it did win at the UK Passive House Awards in 2013 in the category that it was nominated for. Today's podcast came about when I went on a tour of Ashley Vale. This was as part of the AECB conference a couple of months back, and I found it so inspiring because it's 15 years ago really that things got underway for this, and it's now very established. The land was initially going to be scooped up by a large-scale developer, and we're not big fans of them. Their speciality is those poor quality little boxes that they put up. So for me, that fork in the roads of which way is it going, quality house or just to one of those boxes to sell on for profit, and I think it's fantastic. So let's hear that story. We'll get straight into that. And I started by asking Jackson how he came to be part of this project.
Well, I was renting a room with my partner, and I wanted to find a way of making my home more sustainable in terms of its use of resources, its energy efficiency and stuff. And actually renting a space, it's very hard to do that because obviously there's a long-term issue of, if you invest in that property, you don't know how long you're going to be in there. So I was really keen on finding a way of actually buying my own home. Now, I couldn't afford to do that, and we were looking around at old warehouses and potentially run down buildings that we could maybe take on. And while we're doing that, I got a note through the door where a site near where we lived was coming up for sale, and a planning application was in place to develop the site. And the local community, they didn't really want to have a developer come in and create a sort of generic housing model in the area, but wanted to look at what other things they could do with the site. And because we had already been looking at what options were available to us, and because it was on our doorstep, we thought, well, let's go to the first meeting and see what happens.
I like the way how you said that you didn't have any money and so that you were going into this, because when you consider the price of a piece of land and then trying to wrangle that away from developers, it almost seems like you're going to incur way more cost. But I'm sure we'll get to that bit of the story. So you went to this meeting, and then what happened?
So we went to this first meeting. It was in the living room of a house in the Ashley Vale area of Bristol, and there'd probably about 12, 15 people also turned up, and there was a quite sort of energised discussion about what the site was, what was happening to it, and whether, as a collective, could we do something else with it. And two of the people that came to the meeting were people that had already built a house right beside the site. There was one guy called Graham who was amazing in terms of just saying self-build is a really great way of empowering people to create their own home, certainly in a way that's going to be more cost effective than actually buying a house that's already built. So I think that directed the group. And so there was a few people that were really sort of championing that. And I guess it grew from then.
Maybe you could describe the site for us.
Okay, so the site is amazingly situated. It's not a through road site, so you end up here if you're lost or you actually want to be here. And there's a city farm so it's a valley as well. So it's got banks on effectively three sides. One side has got allotments. The other side is a sort of raised railway line that heads north out of Bristol. And the other side is a nature reserve that is a large embankment that goes up, and you can stand up and look out over Bristol. The site was an old scaffolding site, completely covered in a large concrete slab that they used to store the scaffolding in. There's two big warehouses on the site, a big brick warehouse and a prefabbed metal warehouse. There are a few other buildings on site. There was a 1960s office building that the company used, and there are a couple of other smaller sites. There's a toilet block and a sort of garage space to fix up the trucks on the site. So a fairly straightforward industrial site, and beside the site there's a few conventional sort of Edwardian terraces running along. So there's probably, I'm not sure, maybe like 60 homes already sort of in this immediate sort of local area.
It's quite difficult when you're buying land because a lot of the time it goes to the highest bidder. So this scaffolding company, why did they sell it to you?
Okay, so the scaffolding company wasn't particularly interested in selling to the community. They were, as you say, just wanting to sell the site they were moving on. A developer was already in negotiations with the scaffolding company, and they had a planning application in. So the community, once we'd had this sort of inaugural meeting, thought, okay, how do we, if we want to do something else with the site, there are almost two pathways that we need to run in parallel. One is we had to look at how do we stop the developer doing their plans, but at the same time, you can't just stop something happen. You have to come up with an alternative. So it's like, okay, what do we want to do as a community, and start developing that as an idea at the same time as trying to stop the developer doing what they were doing. And because they had a planning application in, it was really looking at what their plans were and then presenting a case saying that this isn't what the community wanted. And at the planning meeting, the community stated that we wanted to have more of a sustainable type of project. And obviously you can't say as an alternative this is what we want, but all we could do is look at the planning application as it was, and we wanted to ensure there was more of a mixed use on site, and that was important in terms of sustainability for housing. And that at the time Agenda 21 was a key policy that was being put around, so we were using that, saying, the future of housing is really important, that this is a key consideration, and that the current planning application wasn't sufficient really in terms of how we need to create homes.
I imagine at the time there were very few other group self-build schemes to draw any experience from. Even now when I look around, and I thought I'd seen a group self-build scheme, but it was more co-housing. So take us through how you all had the confidence not only get this plot of land, but then start developing, designing, or whatever that process was for you.
Well, there were a few other schemes which were more, I guess, people led. So at the time we investigated the Hockerton housing project, and a few of us went off and explored other things. So there's the Findhorn project up in Scotland. And we had a look at Christiana, which is in Copenhagen. So we were sort of trying to get inspired by other things like that. But I think a lot of it came down to the encouragement of a few of the people that were part of that first meeting. There's a guy called Mike, Graham, Martin, Janet, Felicity. There were people that had experience, particularly Graham and Martin, who had experience of building their own place, that were saying, self-build would be a really great way and would really sort of meet the kind of objectives, I guess, of this area, and would allow people to actually create a home that suited what they wanted at a budget that suited them, rather than it being dictated on a sort of more of a top-down process.
What did you have to do to commit to the project so that you've got a plot, you're building a house now?
Okay, so for anyone to get involved, obviously they would want to know what they're getting into. And so we went through a bit of a process. One was that, obviously, as I said, we had to be fighting the planning application that was already submitted, but at the same time we had to come up with a design for the site that kind of worked, and there were conditions with the site that we need to deal with. Particularly, there's a large culvert, so a large waterway that runs through underneath the site, and there's various sort of sewage pipes that run across the site that we needed to take into consideration. So we had to look at what sort of layout would work for the site, how that would divide out into plots and the size of plots that would be available. And that sort of master planning was undertaken. And so then people knew, if they came into the scheme, that the plots were of a certain size, and because of the cost of the overall site, which was in the region of about £750,000, with sort of an estimation of the cost of putting the services in, that all being sort of divided out between the number of plots and the other sort of things we wanted to do on site, came up effectively with the plot price. So at the early stage, once that had been worked out, then there was firstly we had to do some local events where we presented the idea, and we started saying, is anyone up for doing a self-build? And also, I think there's a real drive for people to be part of something exciting. Obviously, there's a lot of risk at that early stage. People were buying into something before we knew it was possible. And the commitments at that early stage were that at the call, people had to put their deposit down, which was 10% of their plot price, around £3,000, £3,000 to put into the scheme at the point before we even had planning. And that was probably my personal biggest hurdle. Where am I going to find £3,000? Which seems a bit bizarre when you think how much a house costs. Finding £3,000 was like, well, I didn't even have £3,000 to find. So, we managed to pull that together, and then it's like, okay, how do we move on to the next stage? And how do we, at the call, and at the point where so this was all happening again while we're still fighting the existing planning application, but we didn't pull the deposits down until we were successful in getting the developer's planning application rejected, which happened, and that's another story in its own right. But getting the planning application rejected, it then went, okay, who's serious about this? If you're serious, put your money on the table, put your deposit on the table. From that, we had the overall master plan that, we had 20 plots on the site, 20 self-built plots, that is. And then there was space in the centre of the site for 6 other plots that we got a housing association involved in. So they were going to build 6 affordable houses on those plots. And then we had the existing office building, the 1960s office building, that we were going to renovate in some way. And so those 20 plots, those 20 groups of people had to put their deposit on the table, and at the call had to come up with the rest of their money to buy the plot at the point when we needed to exchange with the landowner. And so that became quite complicated because we had a solicitor. There was a solicitor that represented the landowner. We had a solicitor that represented the new organisation that we set up called the Ashley Vale Action Group, and that consisted of those people that came to that inaugural meeting. And then we had the self-builders that came in. So the self-builders weren't necessarily the people that were part of the community group. So that's probably a key difference to this site to maybe other self-build projects, is actually this project was set up, designed, created and delivered by the community group that existed of local people that weren't necessarily wanting to build their own home.
I'm not sure I'd even grasp that because I know some of the background of this project from before. So that's interesting that they were just really fighting for their neighbours effectively.
Yes, and that's I think that kind of gets lost sometimes, that actually this project was created by the community that already lived here, that wanted to make the opportunity for other people to be able to live here in an affordable and sustainable way. Obviously, there's a a benefit in one way, so it's like tangible that actually there's an exciting project that happens on their doorstep, but they weren't, the people that are involved in that in the Ashley Vale Action Group weren't directly going to benefit through actually building their own home. Now, there were some, like I think I was the only director that ended up building my own house. So I ended up being one of the directors, and then I had to not be a director of the Ashley Vale Community Group and then became a self-builder. And there were a couple of people that their children got involved in doing the project. But effectively, most of the self-builders that came in weren't part of that community group. So when we bought the site, the self-builders were actually buying the site. They were buying their plots as freehold plots. And because they were buying the plots, they had to have their own legal representative. So we ended up having a representative of the self-builder, a representative for the community group, and a representative of the seller of the land. And obviously the community group didn't really want to be involved in terms of the purchase. It wanted to transfer straight from the seller to the self-builder. But obviously the seller didn't want to deal with a whole load of individual self-builders. So there was kind of quite a legal logistical process there. So, there was a bit of a fun happening there on the legal side.
Take me through your individual plot once you've bought it. Are you doing everything yourself? Are you bringing in an architect? How did it work?
So each of the plots was sold as freehold. Effectively, that meant that each plot holder was in control of the delivery of their own self-build. So effectively, you could have taken any plot and it could have been in a field somewhere, but it happened to be beside a load of other plots that were doing the similar thing. As the community group, as the Ashley Vale Action Group, for people to sign up to it, we created a kind of a policy that we wanted people to conform to. So obviously we wanted people to build sustainably. We wanted people to think about where their materials came from, the energy consumption, and how it could be designed in a way that was beneficial not just to them, but to future residents that end up living in the homes that are created. And as a community group, we instigated a number of training sessions where we got experts in to kind of talk about passive solar design, renewables, energy efficiency, layout, use of materials, those sort of things. So we had a number of training sessions. We also got all the self-builders together to start establishing them as a sort of a collective, and we ended up setting up a self-builders cooperative so we could create a better sort of economy of scale in terms of buying. So because each self-builder was responsible for their own space, it meant that, and I think this is one of the key things that was really valuable for this site and what made it work so well, is there wasn't a requirement for everyone to work on everyone else's houses. Now, quite often you'll see a community or collective self-build project happen where everyone works on house A, everyone works on house B, everyone works on house C. And there is great value in that, and it brings people together. But then you've got to start creating some sort of measurement of how much time has person one put into house A, and is everyone putting their 20 hours a week or 30 hours a week or whatever it is, and how do you measure that, and how do you then sort of value the time? Is one person's hour the same value as another person's hour in terms of price, but also in terms of the amount of work they do or the quality of work they do? So there's lots of things that become difficult, and because every plot was effectively independent, it meant everyone could work in whatever way was most suitable to them. So we, as a collective, we went through a design process, and Graham, who was part of the community group, sat down with everyone, and people sort of expressed what they wanted out of a home. And he kind of formulated that into some designs, which then helped create an overall planning application, which meant that we had the 20 self-built plots, designs for each one separately, all compiled into one big document that we put into the planners. And then if we sort of jump the planning bit for a moment just to talk about the design stage, it meant that each self-builder could try and deliver it in whatever way they wanted. So they could go, okay, we will instruct an architect to help sort of detail it. But also it meant that each self-builder could instruct the delivery of it in any way they wanted. So some instructed a timber frame company to actually build the frame. Some built the frame themselves. Some people collected together and got a timber frame company to build 5 or 6 homes on the site sort of at a similar time. Some people got a different company to build their frame. And then the next stage is some people got contractors in to do different elements of the work. So some people were really sort of hands-off self-build, so they designed or helped design what they wanted, and then they just project managed effectively the build, and they just got contractors in to do it all. And some people just went the whole hog and just did virtually everything themselves. Maybe they got people in where it was required by warranty or required by regulations, to actually get certain things signed off. So there's quite a diversity, and also that diversity also led to different timescales with which people worked at. So, everyone's situations were different. Some people had more time in the week and could be on site and do stuff, and some people were working flat out in the week and, came and did stuff in the evenings and weekends. And that flexibility really was great for the site because it allowed people to work at whatever pace suited them and in whatever way suited them.
Does that mean that you're living on a building site for a number of years, or you just take that in your stride on a project like this?
Yes, it means exactly that. And I think that what we see quite regularly with TV shows about self-build or about developments or anything like that, quite a lot of the excitement is set around, are they meeting their deadlines? Are they going over budget? And everything's left on this sort of hook to pull people in after the adverts or whatever. And in my mind, I'd really like to turn that upside down and say, if people are getting involved in the self-build, then the process, the journey is as important as actually the destination. And actually the journey, especially for a community scheme where you're doing it in and around other people, the journey is crucial because it's the journey that creates the community to start with. And, obviously there are impacts to time scale. If you're borrowing money, then you're paying interest on that and all that thing. And while you're living on site in a caravan, then you're living in conditions that maybe you don't want to be living in or whatever the situation. So I'm not dismissing the issue over time, but I'm just really like to sort of point out that the journey can be a really positive process. And actually, if the journey is seen in that way, then actually living on a site can be really rewarding, if the site allows that to happen. So we had quite a few people living on the site during that process, and we had a really strong community of people living on that site while that happened. So I think we had 6 or 7 big static caravans on the site, and some other people in smaller caravans. It was a really good grounding time where people were very much more involved. The outside space was really important because you're in a smaller space, and I think even the sense of community was very strong then. In some ways, may even be stronger than it is post development, because once people got their homes, they kind of get into their home, they get on with their lives, they've got their jobs, they're kind of off in the day and back in their house. And actually, when you're in working around each other every day and you're building and if someone's got a delivery and you go and help them unload or whatever, then actually they'll come and help you, and you've got that real sense of connectivity between people around you.
Were there any other challenges through the build process that we should mention before we go on to what we have here?
I guess a challenge was that lots of the people that got involved weren't builders. They weren't people that were involved in building or even in construction. So a lot of people were learning the ropes, learning as they went, and some people, they either got the frame built and then worked out what they were doing. And what was great about building your own place on a collective site is there are a lot of people around that either had just done what you're about to do and you could ask them, or they knew that they would be doing what you're doing. And so there was a lot of process where you could actually go and either chat individually to people or as groups. You say, we're trying to work out installation. What have people found as a really good installation? What eco installations are around, that sort of thing. And as a collective, we went, okay, let's go and visit the recycled newspaper factory and go and see what they do and how they work and get a feel of that. And so we set up a group, and a load of us went off and went and actually visited the factory and went, okay, this looks great. Let's use recycled newspaper for our installation. So there was, I think, building your own place can be quite daunting, and I think there's a real aspiration, particularly in the UK at the moment, of this desire that people want to do it. People go, oh, I'd love to build my own home. And it goes right back to as children, people building their dens. I've got a couple of little kids and they just spend all their time building dens, pulling the living room apart, or something will come back and the sofa's upside down, or, and it's like, it's somehow part of our psyche to create a home, create a den, create a space that we're going to be in. And somehow over the years, that's been indoctrinated out of us. We've been removed from the idea that that's a possibility for us. And I think there's an inner instinct that's pulling people back to that. And I think people are starting to stand up saying, I don't want to have a house that's built for me that I've had no control over what's happened in it. I want to have some say over it. And it might be for financial reasons, or it might be taste reasons, or they want to influence the community they're going to be in.
Looking at the finished... Well, actually, perhaps there's one thing that I should bring up before that, and that's the one house that isn't quite complete, nearly 15 years on. So has that caused an issue, or has that made you think about what you might have done differently?
Yeah, interesting. That's my immediate neighbour's house, so I'm probably the one that's affected. We did have in place requirements that people had to build within a few years of actually taking on the site. And it's how you police or how you enforce something like that. And as a community, we've wanted to remain sort of positive and go, look, how can we encourage people to do things in the right way rather than being too dictatorial? And for that one particular house that's not finished, it is a real shame, because there are people that would love to be part of this project, that would have built and would love to be living on this community in this space, and while no one's living in that house, it's a wasted resource for people. There's this question, well, what are the reasons around that? There's been quite a push by the community to try and find ways to resolve that, either providing support or encouragement, or even trying to buy that plot, offering to buy the plot off of the self-builder that took it on.
They weren't a developer though, were they?
No, but the person that's got it does have other homes. So there was, I guess, in hindsight, giving the opportunity for people that don't have a home. That was one of our key criteria at the beginning, is sort of, providing opportunities for people that didn't have a home. But there was also a little bit of a scrabble of going, okay, we need to find people that have got the money to buy the plot so we could purchase. And also, we were as a collective group of people working voluntary, there was a real risk in terms of what we were trying to do, and would we be able to make it all happen and be able to pull together the finances and deal with the legals and win over the planning application by the developer and make enough of the things connect to make the project even happen from the beginning. So there was an element of going, okay, we want people to be part of it who don't already have a home, want to build sustainably, want to live in community, but also going, do we have enough people who have signed up that have got the finance? Because we had, as I said, we had a lot of people sign up, but then when it's like, come on, get your deposit on the table, that's kind of where, a lot of people dropped out because they went, actually, I don't have $3,000 to do it. Or they went, oh, it was a great idea, but actually, I don't think I can cope with building my own home. It seems too much for me. So there was quite a few people that were offered a plot who then went, it's the wrong time in my life to do this. So there was a sort of a closing down in time of going, do we have enough people to be able to do this? And the guy that's involved has been very helpful in other ways on the site during the project. But it is very frustrating that it's not built yet, particularly in terms of people not actually being able to use that as a home and live as part of the community.
Leaving that aside, how do you view your finished community that you've created here and the alternative timeline had the developer got hold of it?
Well, I guess that's all hypothetical. What would have happened if the developer got hold of it? I've got no idea.
I can guess.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, but I guess if you look at any other housing development, that's what it would have been like. Looking at it now, walking around it, and when people come and visit, we've had a huge number of people. We've had delegations from all over the world that have come, right through to local primary school kids and architecture students, and we regularly do tours. We run workshops as an offshoot of the original community group. We set up an organisation called Ecomotive, ecomotive.org. We run workshops to try and help people through the process of coming together as a group. So, but when people come round, it's hard to imagine the site being a big slab of concrete. It's very easy to look at it and go, God, I wish I could be part of something like this. And that is possible, but to sort of visualise what we've got now back in 2000 and go, is this possible? I think it really took that really positive, progressive push by the community to try and create something, and for that real push by some of the existing members of that community who'd already been involved in self-build or handy, or were, we were fortunate that people in that original group had skills to be able to make it happen. There was a guy that worked in the water industry who knew about services, and there's a guy that worked in highways in the council, and he was amazing in terms of guiding on road and systems and things like that. And there was carpenters and architects and all sorts of people. And I think that's the beauty of when you open stuff up to the community, is out in the community there's a whole host of amazing expertise that are able to feed in. And I think we were really fortunate that these people wanted to see something happen in a positive way and in a different way, and it really came down to that push by the local community to make something happen. And I think that's hugely powerful, and it enabled a lot of people who otherwise would not be able to have a home, be able to create a home. And for me personally, I've been able to have a home that that I'm just feel blessed that I had that chance to do it. I've had the experience of building my own house now. I've learned a lot of skills in that process. I've had fun cutting up bits of wood and fitting windows and fitting roofs and fitting electrics and the whole host of stuff. But it's I've got a home that I enjoy being in.
Well, Jackson, thank you very much for your time today, for going through this story. I feel it's a very diverse community, and I really enjoyed having a tour around it earlier in the year. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Lots to take in, which is why we provide show notes with each session. So for this one, you can check out the key points by going online to houseplanninghelp.com/77. We have photos of Ashley Vale. We've got links to Jackson, to Ecomotive. And if you have a comment or question, then please leave that at the bottom of the show notes. If it's something specific for Jackson, we'll try and bring him back as well to answer that. I have an announcement, although it's quite a big one. We've confirmed details of the London premiere of our documentary. This is The Future of Housing and How Airtightness Can Help. It's Thursday, the 4th of December 2014. The location is the Mould Community Centre in Islington, and there's a reason for choosing this, other than it being almost a perfect size for what we're after. It's a retrofit to the Enefit standard, so it gives us a building. Quite often, people who are keen to come to these events probably want to look at a building, don't they? So if you haven't been there before, that's an added bonus to throw in. This is an exclusive event, so capacity at around about 100 people. You need to get in quick. We will have the opportunity to meet the crew, ask any questions, and the tickets are not yet on public release, but the reason I'm doing this is that I thought it made a lot more sense. As we were slightly delayed with the whole project, my life circumstances changed when my son came along, and then I realised, this is quite difficult to do all of this together. And so I thought it's only fair to give our Kickstarter backers priority booking. Of course, it's not going to work for all of them, because if they're somewhere else in the world, getting to London isn't that easy. No, but I wanted to put the offer there just in case. So they have 1 week to snap up their tickets before we open it to everyone. And if you are keen to come, and I'd love just to meet some of you, that's the other thing, that we haven't done this. It's going to be a really fun event. Make sure you're signed up on our email newsletter, because that's where we'll announce the remaining few tickets that are left. houseplanninghelp.com/subscribe. We haven't done any meetups. Maybe that's something for 2015 that we need to get sorted. So this is your opportunity. If you want to come and have a chat with me, I would love that. Check out a building, watch the documentary. It's going to be good. Next time, John Butler is my guest, and we're going to be hearing how he retrofitted and extended a bungalow. And this is hands-on extended, so he's doing it all himself. Not what I want to do, but it's a really interesting story with some learnings too. So I'll see you next time. Thanks.